We're going to do lecture 10 real quick, and it's going to be on visualizing functions and even or odd functions. I'm assuming that we're going to have 2 videos to get everything covered for this, one on the visualizing, one for the even and odd. We're going to go ahead and get started here. The first part of this, guys, is just about the vertical line test. Pause this if you need to write that stuff down, but you guys should know what the vertical line test is at this point. Okay, we've got a function there. Vertical line runs through and hits it at 2 points. Okay, which that means that it's not a function. If it hits it at 2 points, it is not a function. Versus if I look at this one here, any vertical line that I draw through it is only going to hit at 1 point. Okay, so that is an example of something that is a function. Okay, so meat and potatoes are what we're doing today. Okay, you guys are going to be given a picture of a function, and you're going to have to tell us certain things about that function. The things that you're going to need to know are, what is the domain? You're going to need to be able to find corresponding x and y values. So for this example here, they're going to give you an x, okay, f of 2. They're going to give you the x. You got to tell me what the y is. Okay, in this example here, they're going to give you some number. They're going to say, okay, f of x is, and they're going to tell you that that's 2. Well, f of x is interchangeable with y. Okay, so you're going to figure out when your y equals 2, what is my x value that goes with it. We're also going to talk about if a function is increasing, decreasing, or staying the same. We're going to learn what a local maximum and a local minimum is and where they're located. And we're also going to be able to look at entire functions and tell if those entire functions are going to be greater than or less than 0. And we're going to work each of these out step by step. Okay? So starting out, finding your domain. Okay? Domain deals with x values. Okay? When we are looking at our domain, I have always asked you guys before, look to your left and look to your right. So if you guys look at this graph down here at the bottom right, what's the furthest left point that you have? Well, our furthest left point would be on this side over here. Every other part of this function is on this side of that red line that I drew down. Okay? If I asked you to find the domain, or sorry, we're still finding the domain. I asked you to look to the left. I also asked you to look to the right. What's the furthest point to the right? Well, it's going to be that point down there, 8, 3. Everything to the left, that function is there, everything to the left of it. When I give my domain for this, okay, we're going to use interval notation, and I'm going to only look at my x value. So I can say that my function here, this line is at -6, and it runs all the way from -6 to 8. So I'm going to put -6, 8, and I'm going to put square brackets around each side of it because we're including the point. They have closed circles here at the end of both of those. So domain is dealing with our x's. Your range is going to deal with your y's. So we're still on this same picture, but our range values are going to be dealing with our y values, and that's going to be looking up and down. Okay? So what's the lowest point our graph has? Nope, it's not that one. Lowest point isn't there because there's a point lower than that. I don't know how to get that off the screen. There we go. Okay, our lowest point would be at that line there at -3. Everything else is up above it. Everybody agree with that? Hope so. I can't really hear because, we're still recording. There's our highest point. There's nothing above that point right there. So we can say for our range, we're moving from -3, that's my lowest point there, to 6. So my range is going to be from -3 to 6. Again, we're going to have square brackets because we have closed dots there at the end of it. Okay, so that's our domain, that's our range. Okay, moving on to the next, we're going to talk about finding those corresponding parts. Okay, so using your graph to find x and y values. Guys, in lecture 9, we just did a bunch of problems like this. Okay, and I would underline that -6, and I would say, what does that -6 mean? Well, for us when we were doing functions, that -6 there meant that we were plugging in -6 for all the x's that were over on this side. And we did that because since -6 there, that's saying that x equals -6. Okay, so I'm going to go to my graph, and I'm going to look at all my points here, or just spots on the graph in general. I'm going to look, where do my x values equal -6? Well, they equal -6 over here. And there's a point at -6. So when my x is -6, my y value is 2. Same thing for the one down below. This time it says that my x is 8. Okay? So again, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to look at my graph. Where do my x's equal 8? Well, they equal 8 down over here. And you can see when my x equals 8, my y equals -3. Moving on to our next part of it. This time they're going to tell us that for what value of x does f of x equal 6? Now remember, f of x, okay, f of x is interchangeable with y. So all this is saying is, hey, what are my x values where my y value equals 6? So again, come up here to your graph, look at it. Oh, my y's are going to equal 6 up here. So when my y equals 6, my x value is 0. So my answer for this, my answer for this first one is just 0. Okay? Next one, they ask for what value of x does f of x equal 0? Again, f of x is just y. So it's saying, hey, where are my y values equal to 0? Well, right here, my y value equals 0, so I'd write down -2. But when I look at this, there are two other points. There's a point right here, and there's a point right here. Those points also have y values equal 0. Now, they're not exact, so we're going to have to estimate. I could estimate that that's -5.1, 0, and I could estimate that that's 1.9, 0. They're just estimations. They're not exact. Okay? So, -2 is not the only point where my y value equals 0. I could also, and have to also, I shouldn't just say I could, I have to list -5.1, -2, and -1.9. All of those are x values where your y equals 0. As you guys are doing these, you're going to find anytime they give you the x value and ask for the y, there's only one answer. Okay? But if they ask you for the x and they give you the y, you can have multiple answers for those there. Okay? You can have an infinite number of answers for those. All right. Moving on then. We are now going to be looking, at where the function is increasing or decreasing. Okay? So first off, where is the function increasing? Well, if it's increasing, it's going up. So if I'm looking at this graph here, it's not increasing here, but it is increasing here. So I could trace along this. Right through there, my function is increasing. Okay? When I do this, I'm going to look at my x values. And I could say from this point right here, on this way, just like when we were finding our domain, to this section right in here. In this section of the graph, I could say that my function is increasing. Okay? So I'm going to say from -3.5 all the way to 0, my function is increasing. Then it comes to the point, do I need to have square brackets? Do I need to have parentheses? I need to have parentheses around both of these. And the reason is that at this specific point right here, at that point, it's not increasing or decreasing. Okay? Same with this point up here. At this point, it's not increasing or decreasing. Okay? So we're going to have parentheses. In fact, you can make a note that for both of these increasing or decreasing, you're only going to have parentheses. Okay, you're only going to have parentheses for those there. All right, so the blue shows you guys where it was increasing. But if I look at this graph, I could look at this section right here and definitely say that it's decreasing. And I could look at this section right here, and it's also decreasing in this section. So where it's decreasing at is in this section right here. It would be decreasing. Okay, my graph is going down. So from -6 to -3.5, it's decreasing. That's not the only section that is decreasing though, so I'm going to put my U so that I can make that my OR statement. And I can also add that from 0 all the way to 8. In this section right here, you guys can also see that my graph is decreasing in this section. So with this, -6 to -3.5, I'm also going to add a 0 to an 8. Okay? We are always going to have parentheses, and when you're finding your intervals, you're always going to use your x values. That's supposed to say x values. Don't know why that was so hard. X values. Okay? So there's an example of our increasing and decreasing. Okay, now we're going to talk about local maximums and minimums. Local maximums are going to be your hills. Local maximums are going to be hills. Any hill is going to be a local maximum. Your local minimums are going to be your valleys. Okay, any valley is going to be a local minimum. Local just means on an interval. That's not that important. We're going to skip through to the next one. Okay, they're going to ask you two types of questions when they're asking you for the local maximum and minimum. First, let's just look over at our picture here on the right. Let's figure out where our local maximum. Well, right here, I see a hill. That's a local max. Okay? When we do this one in class, a lot of kids want to call this one a local max, but that's not a hill. Okay? A hill is going to be going up and then going back down. So this over here, this section, that's not a hill for us. This picture over here on the right, this graph, only has one local maximum. Our local minimum is going to be this part down here. That's our local minimum. Again, that's not a local minimum over there because it's not a valley. It has to go back up for it to be a valley. Okay? Now, when I'm looking for these, if they are asking for the location, they're going to use words like at which. Okay? Or they're going to say where. They're talking about a location. Okay? If you see those key words, they want to know the location of your local maximum or minimum. They're asking for the x value of that point. If they ask you for the value, a lot of times when they ask for the value, they'll just say, what is it? If they want to know the value of that maximum or minimum, they're going to be talking about the y value. So if I look at my example down below, my questions, it says the number at which. At which means I'm looking for a location. So at which tells me I'm only going to write down my x values here. It wants to know the location of the maximum. So where is my maximum? Well, it's up here. Since it said the word at which, I'm only going to write down my x value because that's what they want to know. It's at 0. Okay? If they want to know what the local minimum is, the local minimum. Sorry, I said that wrong. No, I didn't. They said, what is the local minimum? What is it? They're asking for its value. So that there tells me that they want to know what the y value is. Okay? So I'm going to look at my local minimum, which is right here, and my y value is -2. So my answer for this question down here is -2. We have one more thing to go over. Okay, and it is going to be intervals where the function is greater than or less than 0. Okay, f of x is greater than or equal to 0. Remember, that is just saying that y is greater than or equal to 0. So where on my graph are my y values greater than or equal to 0? Well, this section right in here is where all of your values are greater than or less than, are greater than 0. It's all the stuff up here. So for this function, right here to right here, it is greater than 0. In this part down here, it is not greater than 0. From here to here, it is also greater than 0. So again, they're going to be asking for intervals. Okay? So our intervals are going to be looking just purely at our x values. So from right here to right here, in this section, it's greater than 0. So I could say from -6 to, what did we say that was earlier? -5.1. It's greater than 0. And I could also say from my -2 over here all the way over to my positive 1.9. In this section right here, it's also greater than 0. Sorry. So I'm going to put my u in between them, and then I'm going to put from -2 to 1.9. Now, since this is greater than or equal to, that means I'm including these. All of these